Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we're going to talk about patch 10.1, which a bunch of information has come out over the past few hours about this patch, including some from a dev interview that I got to do, and a bunch of other ones that a bunch of other people got to do as well. And so we're going to go through everything that we've learned about 10.1, and I'll give my takes and opinions about these things as well. So first of all, affixes. There is not going to be a seasonal affix in Dragonflight Season 2 because, so the logic here is we don't need one to keep things different from season to season if all the dungeons are different, which does sort of make some sense to me. And so going into Dragonflight, they knew they weren't going to need that to keep things different from season to season anymore, but maybe there's a way to add some amount of gameplay that feels more like a persistent element to the dungeon. But ultimately, we've heard a lot of feedback around complexity, like how much stuff do I have to know to do and what's going on, and how many wrenches are you going to throw at me? Not even just dodgeballs, but wrenches. Definitely taking a really close look at that with Season 2, so not doing the level 10 affix. So first of all, we don't know if they're gone for good, or if this is something that they're just experimenting with for one season. I suspect that it's something that they probably haven't decided yet either on that. I'm torn because thundering did suck. I'm glad, like, this season would have been a lot better if there wasn't thundering in the keys, I think. It was a good season nonetheless, but I think it would have been improved by thundering not being there. But on the other hand, several seasonal affixes have been phenomenal and have elevated Mythic Plus seasons to levels of, like, enjoyment and replayability that I think will be harder to reach without them. I'm thinking of Encrypted, Awakened, Shrouded to a lesser extent, Reaping, even Infernal, the Legion Time Walking affix, I think was pretty good. Not a lot of people got to play much with it, but so there were a lot of good ones. Then there were also a lot of stinkers, right? Infested, Tormented, Prideful, Thundering, Beguiling, right? So, 50-50 on whether the affixes were good or not. And the bad ones, Beguiling in particular, did really put a damper on, like, how many weeks you actually felt like zoning into Mythic Plus would be something you would enjoy. So I kind of understand taking away the seasonal from that side, but I am still sad about it, and I hope that seasonals come back at some point in the future. But maybe it could be something where some of the later seasons have affixes because at some point we're probably not just going to have Algathar for only one season out of Dragonflight's 4 or 5 potentially seasons, right? It'll probably come back for some combo of seasons 3, 4, and 5, right? And so it could be a good way to do it is like, introduce new dungeons with seasons 1 and 2, and then seasons 3, 4, and 5, we're going back to ones that we were recently in, and maybe that could be a good time to do seasonal affixes, and maybe because you're doing less of them per expansion, they can be more like Encrypted and less like Thundering. But anyways, that aside, that's something that's happening. There's also a level 7 bucket affix refresh. So the level 7 bucket is Quaking, Grievous, Volcanic, Storming, and Explosive that get applied to your keystones at level 7. We don't know what they're doing with this, but we know they're taking a closer look at it. How much opportunity is there for counterplay? How much of that is making your healer's life harder versus how much of that is there an opportunity where if I play really well, I can negate this affix and use my utility really well or whatever it may be. So we're taking a look at the whole level 7 bucket, really more along the lines of an affix refresh as well as no level 10 affix. So I'm a little bit worried about this because some of the changes that they've made to some of the level 4 affixes in terms of adding counterplay have been stuff like adding a dispellable component to bursting that made Mass Dispel like a really potent counter to that, but made, like that there was super pressure on having a Mass Dispel in your group for that affix, and same with Raging, right? Having Soothe or Evoker AoE Soothe against Raging when that became, because for those who don't know, Raging did not used to be dispellable. That used to not be an Enrage back in my day. So I don't really want to see level 7 affixes go towards using like class or spec utility as a silver bullet that just deletes affixes. I guess to some extent Storming has that with like Death's Advance from DK or whatever, but I think that it would be better if they instead focus more on like the playing well, negating the affix. And I think especially if there's not a level 10 affix, maybe there's room for these affixes having some degree of the kind of gameplay that actually changes up your strategy in a dungeon from week to week, which would be pretty cool, because there's kind of not really much of that going on anymore, right? Like Fortified and Tyrannical are the most route adjusting affixes, to some extent bolstering, but way less than it used to be back when it would, kill you if you did it wrong, which it's a good thing that bolstering isn't doing that anymore. So maybe level 7 affixes that affect your routing would be bad, but if they do it in the way that like Encrypted did, I think that could be good. If they do it in the way that bolstering did, I think that would be bad. So I don't know. Cautiously optimistic about this change. This change, the no seasonal in season 2, I guess it feels, I'm sad about it, but I think I understand. But yeah, I hope to see seasonal affixes again in the future, or the gameplay that the best seasonal affixes provided being brought in as, like, if those were brought into the level 7 row and then there was just, some amount of seasonal rotation between what was in the level 7 row, right? Or maybe that level could even go up to a higher key level to keep the complexity away from the low keys or something like that if they wanted to. But could you imagine if the level 7 row just had like Encrypted and Awakened on it, for instance? And, then maybe they could add a new one themed around whatever raid boss, but only every couple of tiers whenever they actually had a good seasonal affix idea, and, retire an old one or put an old one away for a while and then bring it back sometime in the future. I don't know. That could be a really good endpoint for this. That means there wouldn't have to be actually a seasonal affix, but we could preserve some of the best parts of the seasonals. Okay, other stuff that is coming. We have a little bit of a timeline. So the timeline, March 21st for 10.0.7. 10.0.7 is not the topic of this video, but it's worth noting that there's a lot of stuff that is coming with that minor patch. That's the Rep Pally rework, and the Onyx Amulet item that you socket Primordial Stone gems into, and that thing is unclear still how powerful that thing is going to be, but probably going to be pretty good, so that will be content to do, and the whole Forbidden Reach zone is opening up. It's going to be full of rares and stuff to do until Season 2. Now, we don't know when Season 2 is going to be. Looking at this graphic alone, it feels like June or late May or something would be the most reasonable time for this patch to come out. But then you remember that Diablo 4 comes out on June 6th. So that is the huge question mark, is does Season 2 come out? Like, are they going to try and be well ahead of that? Are they going to try and launch this thing like early May? Or are they going to launch it within a couple weeks of D4 and just take the hit on the two games, competing with each other, which personally I hope doesn't happen because I want to go hard on both, right? But, there's maybe not too much overlap there, so maybe they'd be fine with that. Or do they delay this until like June 20-something, when people are, when the first wave of D4 the first wave of D4 burnout has maybe hit, something like that. I don't know. That's a big question mark for me. I tried to get them to leak in my interview and they didn't say, so we'll see. It's going to be a big question mark is when exactly this comes out, but yeah, I think I don't even know which of those things is the most likely, but I hope it doesn't interact with the D4 too much. Tier sets are coming. The complexity is going up a little bit from this tier set, which makes sense, right? Obviously the initial tier set bonuses were very unimpactful and kind of boring. Again, I kind of understand mechanically why they did that, but I'm looking forward to there being some more tier sets that change gameplay and feel good to get. Although it is worth noting that tier sets, they had an answer about this. I don't have the article here, but they had a talk about the Revival Catalyst in one of their interviews and talked about how they are looking at it as the player relationship with tier has changed a little bit from back in the day. We used to, tier used to be something that you kind of got when you got it, and it buffed you then, and it was like aspirational, but now it's something where you feel incomplete without it. And that's something that's going to be more true as the set bonuses get more impactful, right? Like Balanced Druid tier right now is kind of the only one where it's like, oh, you get this and your rotation changes. But tier generally, that's true of more sets than we had in Vault of the Incarnates. So I think they should be looking at some way of having people get their hands on 2-piece and 4-piece sooner than they did in Vault of the Incarnates, because they feel so bad when they don't have it. But Yeah, no firm news on what exactly that might look like this time around. Here are the set bonuses, though. This is Hunter, Monk, DH, and Evoker. Druid, pretty cool. Warrior, wow. And Shaman, lol. Mage, Rogue, and Warlock. And then DK, that looks cool. Priest, obviously the kind of standout one of this go around, and then Paladin over here, who will be rerolling to Priest, I suspect, to yoink that armor. So that's what the tier set looks like this coming time around. These are all different difficulties as well. It'll be the same. I think it'll be the same thing where, like, yeah, you can see like the mythic colors are kind of the same on the same color scheme, and this is the elite PvP color. That's the heroic color. Yeah, I guess these are probably like normal or something. Raid Finder maybe. Who knows? Okay, there's a new gear upgrade system coming in 10.1, which involves flight stones and crests. So it seems like this may be a replacement for Valor and Conquest and that stuff entirely. The way it's going to work is you get flight stones from everything, so you could think of that sort of like Primal Chaos, or experience points or artifact power, just the kind of stuff that drops from like everything. And then there's crests, which are kind of like the Primal Focus, concentrated Primal Focus currencies that drop from specific content at specific levels of gameplay. Unclear if there's going to be, you know, a heroic crest and a mythic crest, or if there's going to be more levels of granularity there. And what you can do is you then have this as the requirement to upgrade an item. So there's the one from my interview. And yeah, there's going to be, there are crests that have different names, like Shadow Flame Crest, Dragon Crest, and they're a currency that tests your high watermark. What M+ number have you done, right? So like 16s for concentrated primal focus, 11s for primal focus, right, is how it works right now. And this will allow you to break into a new tier of item upgrade. You've killed a heroic boss, you get this other type of crest, which will allow you to upgrade this item's potential for upgrading, right? So yeah, it basically seems like they're taking the Primal Focus, Primal Infusion thing, and unclear if these ones are going to also be interacting with crafting, or if they're going to keep the crafting upgrade rewards separate from the, you know, Valor upgrade rewards. But then you're going to be able to upgrade your M+ gear and your PvP gear, and potentially your open world gear as well, up to item levels based off of the crests that you found. And you need to dump a bunch of flight stones probably into that upgrade as well, which drop from everywhere, kind of like Primal Chaos or XP or AP, any of those kind of systems is, I think, the idea. So I, for one, am pretty excited about this because it seems like this could be a good way around the Valor cap as well. They could maybe soft cap how many crests or flight stones, I guess, you could find early in the patch, maybe even hard cap, but then they could ease off on that time gate pretty early on. And that could be a good way to fix the kind of Valor cap issues. And in particular, you know, if crests are gated but flight stones aren't, then that removes a problem that the Valor cap had, which was the Valor cap was extremely punishing if you were upgrading from like 390 to 415 versus being somebody who was upgrading from 405 to 415. And I think that would be a good thing to stop punishing players for doing, because, you know, if you had the score to upgrade to 415, then you could get the gear at 405 or 402, right? It's just, you know, you had to grind for it, and that was kind of a pain, and it presented players with this choice where it's like, okay, I have the Valor to upgrade it now, but I'm screwing myself on the Valor cap next week, and I won't be able to upgrade a different item. So I think this is promising, but obviously details pending. Could be something that is a pain point if they set the numbers wrong on these things. Okay, dungeons. Which dungeons are coming? So here are the 4 new returning old dungeons, not new dungeons. Nelth's Lair, Freehold, Underrot, and Vortex Pinnacle. Now, I love Freehold, like everybody does. I actually like Underrot as well. Underrot's one of my favorite dungeons too. That's always, if you ask me my favorite dungeon from BFA, I probably 9 times out of 10 I'm going to tell you Freehold. But the other 1 time out of 10, I'm going to say Underrot. Underrot was a sweet dungeon. I liked a lot of the different stuff that it tested. I thought it was a really good way. During all of BFA, we were complaining about linear dungeons, and I thought Underrot was a really cool way to have a dungeon that was mostly linear, but didn't, just make you pull the exact same packs every time, every way that you did the dungeon. So that was cool. I thought some of the boss fights had a good mix of different types of difficulty associated with them. And so that's a dungeon I liked. Nelth's Lair. So Nelth's Lair is an interesting one. It's thematically tied into the patch, right? Because the patch is about Neltharion, about going underground, finding Neltharion's old lab, and so it makes sense to do Nelth's Lair as the tie-in there. This dungeon was also brought back in Legion Time Walking. It got a few small tweaks. This dungeon used to be one where you would just play like a full ranged comp and then kite the stupid disc thrower people that would otherwise just murder your whole group. And they basically changed that so that that wasn't the strat anymore against those things. I'm curious if they'll go back and do more mechanical tweaking to it, like they did with Court of Stars, right? Court of Stars was in a similar situation where it was a Legion Time Walking dungeon, and then it was also brought back in Dragonflight and was changed even more to have more kind of modern mechanics. Obviously, Court of Stars, one could argue they didn't go far enough with giving it, some medium difficulty mechanics to, like, Court of Stars ended up having a lot of really brutal mechanics that were completely negated with counterplay that made the key very easy to push at a high level. So we'll see how they decide to handle Nelth's Lair, if they decide to put some more, like, unavoidable damage, but reasonable unavoidable damage type mechanics in that dungeon, or what they'll do with it. And then Vortex Pinnacle. We're going to go back all the way to Cataclysm, which is big news, because this is the oldest expansion that we will have seen so far be a returning dungeon for M+. Mop was the previous high watermark with Jade Serpent. Now, Vortex Pinnacle, not a dungeon that I'm that familiar with, due to it being almost as old as... Well, not almost as old as I am, I'm really old, but being almost as old as half as I am. This dungeon, I don't know really what the mechanics are in here. It's a 3-boss dungeon. I looked through the loot table a little bit for this place. There's kind of not really anything in here. There's like, let's see. Yeah. There's this trinket, a verse trinket with a haste proc. That's in the time walking one. That trinket's not even there in normal and heroic. So I don't know, maybe they'll go refresh the loot table for this, put something interesting in there, put some kind of trinket in there, or maybe just this trinket will be good. Verse with a haste proc. Kind of interesting, although it doesn't have primary stats, so probably not, but we'll see. Oh, wait, I was looking at a certain boss, and then it also has this Heart of Thunder trinket, which is a haste on use, which also seems pretty unlikely to be good. And not really anything else in here, nothing with, like, special effects. There are socketed gloves in here, actually. Where are those? Yeah, gloves. Wait. I swear there were socketed gloves in here. Maybe it was on heroic. Okay, there's double socketed pants. Socketed gloves, socketed belt. So those would be good if they stay like that, but I assume they won't be. But basically the TLDR is who knows what items they're going to put in Vortex Pinnacle. But in the Legion dungeons, in Nelth's Lair, it's more likely that more of these items will stay as is. Nelth's Lair had a few trinkets that people tried to use that expansion. I don't think any of these were... I think people used Neuraxis' spiked... I think this was like a Moonkin trinket. And then Talisman of the Crag Shaper. Potentially an interesting on-use for tanks as well. Depending on... I don't remember how it was tuned back in the day, but it'll obviously be depending on how they decide... Well, if they decide they want it to be good or not. If they put a lot of a number on it, but... that's like a better version than the... This could be a better version of the Brackenhide Hollow trinket. So there's a trinket people are excited about that I'm not excited about from Brackenhide Hollow. That's this take a bunch of damage and then absorb 50% of damage taken up to a certain amount for 15 seconds. But the problem with this one is if you press this thing at low health, it's only going to increase your effective health if you correctly press it while you're still on half health or above, which is kind of a bad quality of a defensive trinket. That's not a downside of the Neltharion's Lair trinket, so maybe that will be useful for tanks that want that kind of defensive on use. Then the BFA dungeons. So going to BFA, we're going to be seeing Freehold, which obviously has Harlan's Loaded Dice, a nice trinket for agility users that I remember using this for all of BFA, so I suspect it will likely be a good choice, at least early on, for all Agi wearers. And then there's also Underrot. Worth noting, Underrot and Freehold are also two of the mount dungeons from BFA, so they're mounts from these ones. But Underrot has some okay trinkets, nothing I'd be too excited from. There's this Vial of Animated Blood, which I think is like an arms trinket, or at least it was. Maybe this will be arms and like a ret trinket again, probably something like that. But then also this place has the Bile-Stained Krog Tusks, which is a single target, like rogue and DH weapon. So probably quite good for those. Probably quite good for those classes if they keep it at its old power level. So that is going to be something to look out for from those old dungeons, at least in terms of the rewards. In terms of mechanics, it'll be interesting to see how much they go back and change Vortex Pinnacle mechanics and Nelthslayer mechanics, and also if they're going to go and change some BFA mechanics. You know, people remember Freehold fondly, but I wonder if they will look at, say, Tyrannical Sky Captain Crag, Tyrannical Captain Eudora, and say, okay, we actually need to tone these things down a little bit or change, because the way that Tyrannical Sky Captain Crag worked is you stood behind a plank so that he couldn't actually hit you, and Eudora as well, you line of sighted that boss also to be able to survive it. So I think that it would probably be good if that wasn't the way to do that key, or especially like with Freehold, you would on you'd wait for the week where it was like Tyrannical but not Eudora week. That would be a good week. Although it was actually Crag was kind of the harder boss in there. So yeah, we'll see if they decide to make some mechanical updates there. Underrot as well. So in my interview with Morgan Day, he mentioned the Dispel profile of Underrot being something that they liked, being something that they wanted to bring back. I actually do think the Dispels were kind of fair in there. Underrot had, I think it was Disease Dispels that stunned you, but you could also interrupt the mob that was casting them. I think they could do with being a little bit less punishing to not have a Disease Dispel in Underrot, but while still obviously rewarding if you did have one, but maybe the stun was like a little bit. I think it was maybe a stun, and maybe it came with like a healing absorb if you got the stun or something, so you could get it off that way or something as well. I don't know. Either way, I remember it being not as bad as like I'm worried about Brackenhide Dispel being, for instance. But we'll see. We'll see how that one works out. Speaking of Brackenhide, that was a question that was asked in one of the interviews, and they said, trust us, we've heard the feedback. We're taking a close look at individual dungeons, probably cutting some things that are existing in M0, and really asking, once affixes are in the mix, do you really need this pull to have 3 creatures that all need to have a kick rotation or something like that? I don't think Brackenhide's problem is necessarily a kick rotation, but the point is well taken here that it's good to know that they are looking at Brackenhide, because I think Brackenhide and Halls of Infusion are very common worries about Season 2. I personally do think that, yeah, if they launched as they are on M0s right now, relative to, you know, how Algathar was on M0, how Ruby was on M0, 2 dungeons that also took some substantial nerfs when they became M+ dungeons over the first few months, that things would be pretty bad. But I'm somewhat confident that they will change those things either before or soon after the dungeons launch as M+ dungeons, because they've been doing a good job of doing that with the past couple of seasons. They've been very quick to nerf the most egregious dungeon mechanics, and sometimes ones even that people would argue didn't necessarily need it. Okay, the raid is coming. Spoilers ahead, although if you're spoiler concerned, I probably should have told you at the start of this video to close the video. But yeah, so the raid is it's called Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. And it is Neltharian's secret laboratory, kind of like Blackwing Descent, I guess, sort of, where he created the Drakthir and ultimately succumbed to the whispers of the old gods and their corruption. So it's a 9-boss raid, and we know as well that the normal, heroic, mythic simultaneous launch is going to be preserved. Now, this is something that I've seen a lot of complaints about on Twitter, because I follow a lot of, you know, high-end WoW players, and that is a community that I think generally gets the worst end of the stick on those 3 difficulties all being launched at the same time. And initially, when you think about it, like, okay, normal, heroic, and mythic launching at the same time. The only people that this should matter for is the mythic raiders, right? So even, this is not something where it's like, oh, this is something that's good for the casuals, but bad for the mythic raiders, so we should do it because the casuals are a bigger part of the player base. But the thing is, the problem with that argument against doing this is that it actually does affect the casuals as well. It does affect everybody, because the mythic release being a week later forced them to lock item levels in M+ for the first week, and that was something that was really counterintuitive and weird, and felt bad for a lot of players, was the fact that you were locked to like farming +4s or +6s or whatever for that first week, and so I understand why they don't, why they like that, why they like having it be a simultaneous release. Even though, yeah, for me personally, it is much worse for me to have them be released at the same time. That dramatically ints my my ability to sleep at all for the first couple of weeks of the season, which, but I signed up for that, right? So whatever, that's okay. I think I do agree that it's probably worth it to preserve that M+ item level, not having to do that weird stuff with capping it. So yeah, I was selfishly hoping though that they would go back to having a heroic week. It does also mean the Race to World First as well is going to probably continue to be, if you tune into the Race to World First on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, you're going to watch people doing splits, or maybe Friday as well. That's very likely to continue to be true as long as they do this. But that's also not, like, even if they didn't do this, that would probably be true on at least Tuesday and Wednesday as well. So I don't know, it's a change with some upsides and some downsides. But I think I understand the upsides probably outweighing the downsides here, even though for me it is way more downside. Okay. Dragonflight Season 2 launch date. So Season 2 is scheduled to release 1 week after the patch goes live. That is... The cadence here is interesting, because often in the past they would do like 2 weeks before the season after the patch, but starting with 9.2, they've been pulling that back to a 1 week thing for the, I guess 9.2 was the last major patch, and then Dragonflight was like an expansion launch, and that was like 2 weeks, and now for this next patch it's a 1 week schedule between the patch and the season, which is good. So there will be 1 week of new outdoor world content, new quests, but no new M+, no new raid, and then everything will hit 1 week after. So we'll pretty much just all still be in our same gear as before, although maybe there will be some upgrades you can find in the outdoor world. Other things we learned in my interview, for instance, the professions are going to be continuing, and they're probably going to be upgrading us, our old items. So in particular, they said, if you love your elemental lariat, you'll be able to upgrade that. Now, I think it's good. First of all, I think the Professions crafted gear did a good job of doing good things this patch for the most part. I do think elemental lariat is an interesting one, though, because elemental lariat, if it continues to exist at the power level it does, it's basically a Heart of Azeroth, right? Like, it's basically a necklace that, you're never taking off for the whole expansion. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. There are ways around it, though, besides just nerfing the lariat, which I guess they already did right before it came out, but nerfing it again and nerfing an item that everybody already has could feel bad. Making some more competitive embellishments that are as good as lariat, or potentially better for some specs, would be another way of doing it, although that would create another problem where then if those get upgraded into next patch, right, are they going to just keep having to power creep themselves for the rest of the expansion in order to get us to actually change our piece? Or are they just happy with us just wearing a lariat all expansion? It does create a bit of this weird thing where you look at a loot table and you see a necklace and you're like, I really hope that item doesn't drop, because that would be very bad if that dropped. So interesting happening there. And they did say there were going to be new recipes as well, but yeah, the plan is to let you upgrade your old ones also. I think that's most of the stuff. Oh yeah, cross-faction guilds are coming. So I didn't ask this in mine, and I don't think people... Yeah, I guess details are sparse on the limitations of this new system. There are some interesting questions about, is this going to interact with the Hall of Fame? Is this going to interact with the cross-faction, or when cross-realm Mythic opens up? because previously Cross-Realm Mythic was tied to the Hall of Fame, and I personally think that Cross-Realm Mythic would be something that would be good if it opened up earlier. It doesn't really affect me that much because I've been able to just pug on server because I'm on a high pop server, but I don't think people on low pop servers should have to have a much harder time of like pugging, first 2 Mythic once it becomes doable to do that. So I think cross-faction Mythic should open up earlier, and maybe the cross-faction guilds existing will be something that lets them revamp the Hall of Fame system and potentially desync it from Cross-Realm Mythic. But yeah, I'm curious to see how that works out. Either way, cross-faction guilds is going to be a huge plus. That's something that as soon as they open the door to cross-faction gameplay, cross-faction guilds was just something that was more of a when than an if, and the sooner that when is, the better. So glad to hear that it's going to be 10.1. Other than that, I think that's most of the changes that I could think of. I've probably missed something from the announcement. Of course, I didn't talk at all about the underground zone and the new renown track, all that stuff. Those things are really cool. I'm looking forward to them. I enjoy a lot of the outdoor world content and stuff in this game as well, but that's the kind of thing where it just kind of matters how good is it when they actually implement it. It's not something you can kind of talk about in theory in the before it happens, in the same way that you can about like a new upgrade system in theory, right? So yeah, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you are excited about 10.1. Let me know what you think about all the things below. Let me know what you think about the seasonal going away, the dungeon rotations that they selected, the upgrade system, the simultaneous release of normal, heroic, and mythic, how that affected you as a player, if that's something that you're glad to see going forward. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.